Recording in progress.
So thank you, Prajwal. Thank you, everyone. So we are continuing this session, that is the lecture series on the foundational text of Indian philosophy. And I think we are discussing some fundamental doctrines of Advaita Vedanta in the last few sessions. And we discussed the type of books that are found in the canonical literature of Vedanta, like for example the sutras, the bhashyas, the vartikas, the vrittis, the tikas and karikas and so on. Some of them are in prose, some of them are in mostly in verses. So now just a background about this hierarchy of Vedantic teachers. If you look at the traditional school of Vedantins, you find they have a long tradition of Vedantic teachers, beginning with Vasishtha, then his disciples and their disciples like Shakti, Parashara, Vyasa, Shuga, Gaudapada and so on. And then after Gaudapada, you find Govinda Bhagavapada and then Shankaracharya. This is one period of Vedantic tradition or Vedantic lineage, so to speak. The great ancient writers. We cannot speak much about their historicity or their life or the teachings other than what we gathered from some of the traditional texts. For example, Vasishtha is a mythological figure, but he was also a great philosopher. So not entirely mythological, so half historical, half mythological. And then his disciple, for example, Shakti, Parashara, and we don't really find any historical evidence or details about where they lived and where they were born and so on. About Shuka also we don't know much. The Gaudapada is more or less a historical figure. There are many sources from which we can get a general idea of his life and contributions. And his disciple Govinda Bhagavapada was another great teacher who lived in the central provinces of India on the banks of river Narmada near Indore. It's called Omkareshwar. So, and his disciple Shankaracharya, of course, is a historical figure. We know a lot about his lifetime, his teachings, where he was born, his parents, and how he traveled all over India, preaching Vedanta and writing this wonderful classical text on Vedanta. We know a lot about that, about Shankaracharya. And then his disciples, Padmapada, Astamalaga, Todaga, Sureshwara and so on. So you can see from Shankaracharya onwards, there is a direct lineage that we can see. And then Vimuktadman, Sarvatnyatma Muni and Mandana Misra, Vajaspati. There are a number of scholars who are coming right up to 16th century, Madhusudana Saraswati. And also, we also read a lot about some pre-Shankarite Vedantins who wrote commentaries or some important texts or commentaries on Brahma Sutras like Badari, Karnajini, Atreya, Udulumi, Asmaratya, Kashakrishna, Jaimini, Kashiba, Badarayana and so on. You know, I am referring to all these important names in Vedantic lineage because this is the main difference between what you study in a university and what you study in traditional school. This is something very interesting. Now, among the Western scholars who had a close understanding of this traditional lineage of Vedantic teachers, we can actually mention only one great writer. He was Paul Deussen. He was a German. He lived in 19th century. He went to Benares. And his contribution is very unique because his translation of almost 60 Upanishads into German and their translations into English are classic. and considered to be the closest approximation to the original implications of the Vedantic text. Now, after having said this, I want you to get an idea of how these Vedantic ideas are discussed in the fundamental canonical texts. These texts belong to different categories. The foundational text means the bhashyas, the commentaries on the Upanishads, on the Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Sutras, which in a way harmonize the rational, the devotional and the canonical traditions or foundations of Vedanta. Brahma Sutras discuss the logical, the rational foundations of Vedanta. Bhagavad Gita harmonizes different paths that one can follow to realize the Vedantic teachings in their life. For example, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga and so on. And the commentaries on the Upanishads, they are so profound, and I mentioned this on a few occasions in the past. When Western scholars like Max Muller or before him Schopenhauer and others happen to read even some inaccurate translations of these Upanishads, they were really wonderstruck. There is actually a turning point in the history of world thought. I mean, the encounter of Western intellectuals who later became Western Indologists or Orientalists who went to India or even staying back in Europe, they made great studies of Sanskrit language and the philosophical literature available in Sanskrit. It is actually one of the turning points in the evolution of world thought, the Western encounter with Vedanta. Now, how these ideas, Vedantic ideas, are discussed in different Vedantic texts, that's what we are going to discuss today. As I mentioned, the Upanishads and the commentaries, these ideas are discussed using different tools of epistemology and different tools used in modern philosophy, which have their own perhaps counterparts in ancient Greek thought, at least to some extent. Of course, there are differences. I mentioned this earlier. If you have 10 tools of epistemology, tools of knowledge in the theory of knowledge in Indian thought systems, there are maybe maximum 3 or 4 tools of epistemology in ancient Greek thought. For example, Indian systems of philosophy believe in direct perception, inference, analogy, well-bead testimony, presumption, and negation. Negation also is a source of knowledge. If when you know that it doesn't exist, I mean, the knowledge, the absence of something is actually knowledge. And then hearsay, direct memories, then external gestures, and leaving out the unnecessary parts called excluded middle. It is called parishesia. I mean, leaving out but is improbable. That's one of the unique aspects of Indian epistemology. If things are not clear to you, you are most welcome to ask questions during discussion, because many of these ideas can only be referred to during the main part of the lecture. During interaction, you can certainly ask me for more elaboration. Now, how these ideas are discussed in the fundamental texts like the commentaries on the Upanishads and also in the introductory works. As I mentioned earlier, Shankaracharya wrote a number of different types of books. The great commentaries, which are very philosophical, and then introductory works which belong to different categories. There are short, simple works like Tattwabodha, Atmabodha, and so on, which are very tiny, which only contain the primary definitions. Then, of course, there are more advanced books like Vivekachudamani. Among the introductory books, I mean the works of primers or introductions to Vedanta, Vivekachudamani is one of the important books. because it is not very short, because it has got almost 581 verses. There are 2-3 different versions available in popular bookshops. One version has got 584 because they include the invocation also as part of the main text, and some versions only 580, some of them 579 and so on. Anyway, more than 579 verses. So it's not very, very small. It is, but certainly not very large. The book is very, very, very small. Now, if you have got only the verses without translations and commentaries, it is fairly a small book. Now, how these ideas are discussed? You get a taste of how these Vedantic ideas are discussed in metrical form, in verses, in beautiful language, where you find classical examples of analogy, imageries, illustrations, and graphic descriptions from everyday life. So these are some of the examples of simple writings in verses, expounding the highest philosophical ideas, which also contain definitions or descriptions of an ideal teacher, an ideal student, who is fit for philosophy, who is fit for study of higher philosophy. All these ideas you find. What are the qualifications for a spiritual seeker? When you read that, you will understand Shankaracharya was not talking about the fundamental qualifications for a spiritual seeker of Hinduism or Vedanta. He was talking about the human aspirations in spiritual life. Who is the right person for aspiring for spiritual life? So I shall just give a brief exposition of this simple text, which gives you an idea of a typical introductory work on Vedanta. It's called Vivekachudamani. In English, you may call it the crust jewel of wisdom. That is how they translate this book into English, the crust jewel of wisdom. What is wisdom? Wisdom is something that helps you to make proper use of what you know. It doesn't just give you information, because information doesn't always serve any real purpose in life. Information should become knowledge, scholarship, and then it should become wisdom. And when it becomes wisdom, it helps us in our everyday life. It helps us in our interactions with others, and also it helps us to feel a kind of inner peace and tranquility and fulfillment. So you can find this text discusses what is the purpose of human existence, what's the nature of Atman, what's the nature of existence, how does a person get liberated spiritually, what's the importance of knowledge and devotion in spiritual liberation, and what do we mean by bondage, and what is Maya, what is Avidya, who is an ideal teacher, who is an ideal disciple, and what is her personality, Karana Sarira, Sthula Sarira, Sukshma Sarira, means what is the place of this physical embodiment, and what is behind this physical embodiment, what's our true nature, how we inherit characteristics and habits and tendencies from our previous life, and how this life continues as a transmigratory cycle, and how we get out of this way of birth, life, death and rebirth, which of course according to Buddhism is a bondage. It works through the pratitya samutpada, got dependent origination, and you get out of this by realizing the dukkha, the impermanence of everything, and by practicing Four Noble Truths, by understanding Four Noble Truths, and by practicing the eightfold disciplines, Samyak Drishti, Samyak Vyayama, Samyak Ajiva, and so on, the right conduct, the right action, the right word, and so on. If you have got any doubt, because this is not the main subject, we will discuss Buddhism later, but I am just referring to that. Now let us come to the text. The text is Vivekachudamani. It has got 581 verses in most of the standard versions. Just a few verses, maybe less or more in some of the different versions. The text begins with a student, or rather the author here, paying tribute to his teacher. Now this is an important thing. Every great author, every great writer should remember his preceptor when he begins a lecture or when he begins a work. This is very important. Now Shankaracharya is the author, writer here. So he begins his work, Vivekachudamani, by what is called in Sanskrit Guru Vandana, means tributes or invoking the grace or blessings of the teacher, the preceptor. Sarva Vedanta Siddhanta Gocharam Tamagocharam Govindam Paramanandam Sadgurum Pranadosmyaham. So Sarva Vedanta Siddhanta Gocharam Tamagocharam means the teacher Govinda Bhagavatpada. He got that name because he had realized the truth of the teachings of the Upanishads. So Gobhihi Upanishad Vagbhihi Eva Vidyate iti Govinda. Gobhi Eva Yo Vedya iti Govinda. It's very interesting, Upanishads are compared to cows. Not that Upanishads are cows, but Upanishads are like cows. In ancient times, at least in India, cows were the main currency, the main wealth of people. Because cows used to give milk, cows used to provide what you call yogurt. So many things people used to make out of milk. So milk was an important part of human existence. Milk was consumed, milk was used in the offerings and Vedic rituals. Milk was offered to the Vedic gods and goddesses in ancient times. So milk was very important. So cows were considered to be the main wealth of a person. So now the point is, the teachings of the Upanishads are like cows, like mother who sustain you, who help you to live a peaceful, a healthy, a happy life, providing you whatever you need, wisdom and also your sustenance. So this Govinda got that name because a person who has realized the teachings of the Upanishads, which are like cows for human existence, because we not only need milk, we also need spiritual wisdom. So Upanishads, the Vedantic texts, give you this wisdom in a way how to make proper use of the art of making proper use of what we know. That is wisdom. So that's why he got the name Govinda Bhagavatpada. Now, the real beginning is, the actual beginning of the text is the second verse. And that is a very profound, well-known one. It tells you that God has given you three wealth. That means, Jindunam nara janma durlabham arapumstam tato viprada tasma vaidiga dharmamaga parada vidyuttam asmat param atmanatma vivejanam sunubhavo brahmatmana samsthidihi muktirno shatagodi janma krudaihi punyadvina labhyate. And then it says, Durlabham trayamaivedat devanugrahagedugam manushyuttam mumukshuttam mahapurusha samsaya. Third verse. It's very interesting now. The three gifts that you get, the three gifts from God is, first of all, the privilege of being born as a human being. That's a privilege. Because animals cannot sit and think about why am I here, what's the purpose of human life. Animals can only follow the instinct. But human beings alone can pause for some time. Because in this flow of evolution, only human beings can sit and think about the meaning of their life and existence. So, the three gifts that come from God, one is this special privilege, this unique privilege of being born as a human being. And there are many human beings are not very different from animals because they live at the instinct level. But there are certainly human beings who think of something beyond what they see in front of them, who can think of something beyond their food, their shelter, and their material needs and these physical enjoyments. That is called mumukshutva, means a thirst for spiritual enlightenment, a thirst for spiritual liberation. That is called mumukshutva. Moksha is a person who wants to get moksha or liberation. So first of all, the first privilege is the privilege of being born as a human being. See how the text begins. It is so unique. It comes down to our basic human existence, our place in this evolution. In this evolutionary world, human beings have certain qualities which make them really unique in many ways. That is, they are born as human beings. And if you are born as human beings with a sincere desire for evolving at another level, not a physical level, but another level, at a spiritual level. Because there is plenty of scope for evolution at the cultural level, at the level of values, at the level of ideas. So, thinking of the meaning of, the fundamental meaning of existence and a desire to know one's own true nature and thereby to get spiritual enlightenment. That is a mumukshutva. The second unique gift that comes from God. The third one is an opportunity, an occasion to get association with somebody who can talk to you about spiritual ideas, about going beyond the physical plane. Because very often we may have ideas in mind, but we can realize the great ideas that we have in mind only by practicing certain disciplines. And these disciplines can be learned only from a person, and that is possible only by getting a chance to associate with spiritual personalities. So that's why these are three unique gifts coming from God: Manishuttum, Mumukshuttum, Mahapurusha Samsaya. So the author calls it Durlabham, which is very, very rare. Trayamekaitat. I mean, these three gifts, Durlabham, mean very, very, very difficult, very rare, not easily available. We can see that if you look around, nearly 8 billion people living this planet, how many people actually think of anything other than the immediate physical needs and requirements. So, and that is actually a gift from God, a sign of God's grace for you. That's the idea. Not ideas coming to the mind, but a real, genuine aspiration for spiritual life. That is a unique gift coming from God. And these three gifts, being born as a human being, and being born as a human being with a spiritual aspiration, and then an occasion or opportunity to be acquainted with, to be associated with a spiritual teacher. These are three unique gifts. Now, before that, in the second verse, the teacher tells you that in reality, of all births, the birth of being born as a human being is rare. And you have to remember, among them, to be born as a spiritual seeker is still more rare. And you may be born as a person with a lot of spiritual aspirations, but to get an opportunity to study the Veda, the scriptures which contain spiritual ideas, that is also very rare. I mean, that's and again, and still to get proper scholarship in scriptures, that is still rare. And many people can get scholarship. There are many people who know a lot about the Upanishads. But along with that knowledge, a strong desire to actually experience what the scriptures teach, what they have learned, what their scholarship has given them. That thirst for realization of what they have learned, that is still rare. After this, the author tells you that the three gifts from God are this: the privilege of being born as a human being, and privilege of being born with a spiritual aspiration, and also the unique privilege of coming in contact with somebody who may indirectly be the cause of your future spiritual growth. That is also very, very rare. That is the statement. Now, in another verse, in the 16th verse, the teacher tells you who is actually fit for spiritual learning. Now, we know very well that what you get may not be yours. Only what you earn is yours. When we earn something, it implies that we are ready, we deserve that, we are fit for that. What we are given may not always be ours. It may not be always helpful to us. It becomes helpful to us only if you are ready for it, if you are mentally and spiritually prepared to make proper use of that. So in the 16th verse, the author tells you who is an ideal spiritual seeker, what are the qualifications for an ideal spiritual seeker. These are very, very important. So you can see in a single text, Shankaracharya, the author, explains everything. Vivekachudamani, though it's just relatively speaking, it is one of the insignificant texts in Vedanta. Some of you may have studied, may think we were disappointed. You may have thought this is everything. Well, the Vivekachudamani is actually an introduction, but it's a wonderful introduction. Absolutely complete introduction. It's a primary text, but it is a full introduction. And once you actually study this thoroughly, you can go and read any complicated Vedantic text. And again, you get a touch and a feel of the tradition, and this is very important. Actually, tradition is important in all learning. When you want to become an engineer, you have to go to a good engineering university. If you want to become a good doctor, you have to learn the art of treating patients from a doctor. If you learn medicine by correspondence course, it will be like learning swimming by correspondence course. You will be killing others, and of course you will be drowning yourself. So like that, in all branches of learning, lineage and tradition are important to give us the real knowledge of what we are supposed to be learning. So here the verse is very simple. Medhavi purusho vidwan uha poka vichakshanaha adhigari atma vidyayam ukta lakshana lekshitaha. I'm not actually teaching this text as such, so I may not be giving full description, but you are always welcome to ask any question. It's an open session. Now, who is a real student? In a way, we all apply these principles everywhere. In all branches of secular learning, we apply this principle. But the problem is, we think that in spiritual life, none of these principles apply. Their engineer can perform a surgery in spiritual life, which is ridiculous. We don't allow that to happen in society. But in spiritual life, anyone can. Well, if Christ could do that, why not I? If Buddha could do that, why not I? This problem is there. That's why the teacher tells you have to be fit for something. Then only what you receive will be yours. So the point is Methavi. So a person should have Metha. Now what is Metha? Metha is a Sanskrit word. In fact, in the Vedic tradition, there are some important suktas extolling refined intellect as a goddess. I mean, refined intellect, I mean the wisdom, the spiritual wisdom of a person is extolled as a god. Metha Devi Jushamanana Aga Vishwajit Bhadra Sumanasimana. This is how it begins. Metha Sukta begins in the Yajurvedic tradition. Now, so Metha means the ability to listen and understand its real implication. I mean, the ability to listen or read. In modern times, you cannot listen to everything. We cannot have oral tradition in this 21st century. But we can read. But when we read, what we learn, what we understand will very much depend upon how refined our intellect or our mind is. An unrefined intellect or an unrefined mind, a crude mind cannot understand a high idea, any higher spiritual idea. That's very important. So, one quality one should have Metha. Metha means purified intellect. Grandhadharana Shakti, that also is one means the ability to read and retain the true meaning of a book, of what we learn. That is one of the definitions given by Shankaracharya in some other books. So first of all, we should be able to know what we are learning. And for that, mere IQ will not do. For that, IQ should have some other qualities. Mind should be refined, purified. Then only that mind can listen to and retain. Very often, what we retain in our mind is what we are interested in. This is an important thing. What remains in our mind after learning is frequently what we were interested in when we read a book. So, to be interested in spiritual ideas, our mind should be sufficiently refined, purified. So, that's an important thing. Metha, pure intellect, pure mind is necessary for every spiritual aspirant. Medhavi Purusha Vidwan. And then the next meaning is, the next important qualification is that person should be a knowledgeable person. I mean, Viveki, a man of discerning wisdom. And then another important set of qualities mentioned, Uha Poka Vichakshanaha, an expert in two functions of human mind, Uha and Apoha. Uha actually means, the two words means, so Uha is the ability to accept what is to be accepted. And Apoha means the ability to reject, to eject what is to be ejected. In other words, when we read something, we read many things, but what we should read and what we should retain in our mind and what we should automatically ignore. For that we need a kind of discerning wisdom. And that is an important quality for every great or real, genuine, sincere student. That's what implication. Uha Apoka Vichakshana means. This is very, of course, Sutyoga Parasparam Bhede Nyayopeda Giriyasi Apoka, etc. Means they're very interesting. There are many definitions here. Means the ability to logically analyze what we read or what we listen to, and to accept and retain in our mind what is to be accepted, what is to be retained, and automatically reject what is to be rejected. Unless a person has the ability to reject, he'll be heading for trouble in modern times, because this is the age where information has become a monster. The information has become a monster, this information age. So we should know more about what to reject than about what to accept. That's a problem of our times, because this flooding of the internet and modern computer systems or modern technology with a lot of unnecessary and often dangerous and misleading information. Maybe it has more importance in modern time. Uha apoka vichakshana. And then adhikari atma vidyaya mukta lakshana lakshita. Means these are the qualities for an ideal student. This is a very, very important verse here. Okay, now I will come to another subject. This is very important. This is actually the essence of this text. This comes in the 51st verse. Remember, this work has got 581 or 584, depending upon the larger version or the smaller version. Verses, 581 verses. It's a fairly big book in that sense. In that, there is one important verse that comes 51st verse. And that is the foundation of this book. See how expertly the entire book is designed. First, the teacher tells you, see, you are born as a human being. This is a unique gift that has come from God. And you are not just a ordinary human being immersed in worldly enjoyments. You have got a discerning wisdom. You have got this aspiration for higher life. And also, you have got an opportunity to connect with some spiritual persons from whom you may learn more about spiritual enlightenment. These three unique gifts you have got. This is interesting. So, first of all, the author is praising you. You are wonderful. You have come to this class. You got admission to the university. You are sitting to, so congratulating you, and then telling you what are the qualities for an ideal student. Actually, these principles apply in modern times also. We are all applying those principles in all spheres of education and life. One should be fit for something. When you go for higher studies, you should have completed the qualifying examinations or the qualifying degrees. Then only you will be admitted. So that's it. But in spiritual life, there are some other qualifications necessary. So that will be discussed. It's a very interesting discussion here. Of course, those qualifications are discussed in the 19th verse. So those of you may not have the text with you, but you can remember, because when you replay this, you can get an idea. This simple introductory series of lectures will help you to enter this book, and modern translations are available. So I'm trying to give you just a key, some kind of a password, an entrance. So that's the idea behind. Now, in the 19th verse, the general qualifications for all spiritual seekers in all traditions are listed. That is, it comes here, Ado nitya nitya vastu viveka pariganyade ihamutra phalabhoga viragha tadanandaram samadhi sarkasampurti mumukshuttam idi spudam. This is the, it is called by one particular name. It is called sadhana chadushtayam. It is called sadhana chadushtayam. Sadhana chadushtayam means 4 important qualifications. That's the meaning of sadhana chadushtayam. What are the 4 important qualifications? One is, you should have a proper understanding of what is real and what is unreal. what really matters, what is really significant in life, what really helps me in my entire life, and what is relatively insignificant. So this is an important qualification. First of all, the ability to choose, to decide for ourselves what is real and what is unreal. Often the translations cannot give full details. What it means is what really matters in our life and what is relatively unimportant or insignificant. That is called first qualification. And this is for everyone. And the second one is, Ihamutra phala bhoga viraga tadanantara. Now this is special to Vedanta. That is, not having any desire for anything in this life or next. So those who belong to Abrahamic traditions need to clearly understand this. In Indian Vedantic tradition, you will find this interesting statement: you should not have any desire to go to heaven. That statement you find in Indian Vedantic tradition. You can find in Buddhism also, because heaven also is a transition point from where you have to be born again. And Buddhism helps you to get out of the transmigratory cycle, pratitya samutpada, by the practice of Four Noble Truths and by practicing the Eightfold Disciplines. So, and then you get this nirvana. But in Vedanta and Buddhism, in all Indian religious traditions, you find heaven is not looked upon with much favor. Why? Because in Abrahamic tradition, Christianity, Judaism, heaven is always associated with something spiritual. It is associated with angels, with God, and so on. For my Father in heaven, and so on. That's not the meaning, the implication of heaven in Vedantic text. In Vedantic text, heaven is a place where you continue enjoying all worldly pleasures without any limitation, without any restriction. And that is certainly not a very, very desirable place to go, especially for spiritual seekers. So you should not have any desire either for enjoyments in this life or enjoyments in heaven. This is an important thing. That is the second qualification. Iha amutra phala bhoga viraga. Viraga means total renunciation of the idea of enjoyment. This is important. The third qualification is samadhi sarka sampatti mumukshukti. Means that is the six important disciplines: samadhi sarka sampatti mumukshuttam, shama dhamma tidiksha uparadi saddha samadhanam. These are the six qualifications. Means a kind of inner restraint, mental restraint, restraining the senses, and ability to withstand difficulties without complaint, ability to endure challenges. You can find in all spiritual seekers one important common factor, commonality in all spiritual traditions, that all sincere spiritual seekers have to go through a difficult road. They have to follow a difficult road. Not easy. Life is not very easy for spiritual seekers. That's an important thing to remember. Anywhere you find all traditions, spiritual seekers should have tremendous power of endurance, and they should have power of concentration. They would also have a sense of sanctity and sacredness. This is important. And above all, they should have a sincere desire for spiritual liberation, for spiritual enlightenment. These are important for all spiritual seekers. If you look at any spiritual tradition of any religious tradition, find these are common. First of all, a sense of the real and the sense of the insignificant. And what is real, we should have the ability to uphold, to stick to hold fast to the path of the real, what really matters. And we should have the ability to give up to disregard what is unreal, what is insignificant, worldly enjoyments and so on. And then this automatically will give you a kind of inner restraint. Actually, in human life, every person can experience this. If you have a higher ideal in life, then you will have if you have natural modesty, self-control, self-restraint, concentration, peace of mind and so on. If you have something to hold fast to. Swami Vivekananda made a statement once. A man with an ideal will make 50 mistakes. A man without any ideal will make 50,000 mistakes. That's the only difference, really speaking. A man with an ideal also make mistakes. But man with an ideal will have the ability to recognize that he has made a mistake after he has made a mistake. But a man without an ideal is somebody who is walking without a flashlight. He won't be able to turn the flashlight into his own heart. So he may commit 50,000 mistakes because he never realizes that he made a mistake. That's the difficulty. Because so any higher ideal is like an electric torch that you hold in your hand. You may still fumble upon errors, but these are human errors, but you also be able to recognize the fact that you have made an error and you will be able to rectify, or you may be able to avoid making similar mistakes in future. So that's why, the samadhi satkansambati is psychologically very important. Self-restraint, sense control and so on. And the fourth one is important, mumukshutva, means a strong desire for spiritual enlightenment. That's actually some higher ideal in life. Some higher ideal. He'll be more moral, actually. If you have some higher ideal in life to guide you, you may not realize that ideal in this life. You may not, perhaps, unfortunately. You may or may not. But even if you do not realize or reach your ideal, the fact that you have an ideal to hold fast to will help you from many problems. That's why mumukshutvam is important. These are 4 disciplines mentioned in this book. There are 3 more disciplines mentioned in other Vedantic texts. That is Sravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam. These are 3 important disciplines. Sravanam actually means Itham vakyehi tadathanusandhanam sravanam bhaved. In one of the major, bigger introductory works, Panchadasi, Vidyaranya. Vidyaranya was a follower of Shankaracharya's tradition, lineage. He says, what is Sravanam? You listen or you read. Modern times, in ancient books, they always use the word Sravanam because most of the studies were carried on by oral tradition. You listen to the teacher. And actually when you hear, you are more likely to retain that in your mind, in memory. What we read, we may or may not remember, frequently it so happens, but when we listen to something carefully, then we are more likely to retain that in the mind. That is, Sravanam literally means listening to or hearing with attention. So, Itham vakyehi tadathanusandhanam sravanam bhaved. When you listen to something, that arthanusandhanam, you mentally follow the path of what you heard. Means chasing your idea. Mentally contemplate or thinking of the implication or the meaning of what you listen to. That is Sarvanam. These are important qualification Vedanta. So that's what Panchadeshikara means, the author of Panchadeshika, Vidyaranya Swami. He was one of the great monks who came after Shankaracharya's time, some 400 years, about 500, 600 years later after Shankaracharya, he came, Vidyaranya. That is an important qualification. Listening with attention, with proper understanding the meaning, and mentally following that meaning. And then mananam, srudasya arthasya upatibhi chintanam mananam. Srudasya arthasya upapattibihi chintanam means thinking and contemplating and logically analyzing in our mind of what we heard or what we read. This is very important. Just blindly following the meaning, well, that's good, but the idea goes deeper into our mind when we logically analyze in our mind, not loudly. In our mind, when we logically, the upapatti bhiji means logical analysis, rational thinking. Chintana means contemplating. So when we can listen to something with proper understanding of the implication of what we are listening to, and then when we logically analyze in our mind what we hear and do this self-analysis, and then when we merge in the thought of that, when we merge ourselves mentally in that idea, that is nididhyasanam, vijadiya pratyaya tiraskarena sajadiya pratyaya pravahikaranam, nididhyasanam means. So when we listen to something, especially spiritual ideas, frequently people have this problem of negative thought current suddenly assaulting you. When we listen to something that is not related to worldly enjoyment, we may be interested, but frequently we are not able to fully focus on what we are listening to. That's because a lot of negative thought currents, that is called vijadiya pratyaya means. A lot of negative tendencies and thought currents will come to the mind. They should be avoided, they should be rejected. And we should create in our mind a harmonious flow of positive thought currents that help us to focus on the spiritual ideal that we have chosen for ourselves. This is nididhyasana. Now, these three important qualifications are important. They are very significant for every serious student of Advaita Vedanta. In fact, these 7 disciplines, that is called sadhana chadushpayam, in first 4. Nitya anitya vastu vivekakam, ika amutra bharabhoga viragaka, samadhi sarka sambati mumukshutvam. Means, first of all, to have an ideal, to an idea of what is real and what is unreal, and then holding fast to what is real and giving up what is unreal, what is insignificant, and then the ability to gradually develop this self-restraint, concentration, peace, harmony within, endurance, and again a higher ideal meant for spiritual enlightenment, plus listening carefully, then contemplating and logically internalizing what we learn, and then merging our mind completely in it. Nididhyasana. These are 7 disciplines that are important for Vedanta. Now you can imagine, in such a huge book, there are certain verses which are very, very significant. Once we understand the anatomy of the book, the philosophical landscape of the work, and once we keep that in mind, then when we read this, there are many translations available. It will help us, it will be very helpful, and we'll continue discussion on the same book in the next class. This is relatively a very rudimentary primary introductory work, but it can give you everything that is needed for a proper understanding of Vedanta philosophy, Vedantic culture. In a way, when you talk about Vedanta culture, Vedanta philosophy, it is something very universal, not something pertaining to one particular religion or anything. Shankaracharya is speaking about the natural, spontaneous spiritual aspirations of every human being who wants to live a higher life in this world. So it is as applicable to our times as it was during his time. So thank you. We will have interaction. You are most welcome. Yeah.
Swami?
Yeah, most likely.
I have a question related to the last class,
Yeah.
which was, what is the difference or how does it, so Nagarjuna, I thought was the first philosopher who talked about non-causality.
Yeah.
And how does that relate to Gaudapada? The relationship, between what Nagarjuna said, was he actually the first? And how does that relate to what Gaudapada said?
Actually Nagarjuna was not the first one to talk about non-causation. You find non-causation idea in Yoga Vasishtha. Yoga Vasishtha has got two versions. Laghu Yoga Vasishtha itself is a fairly big book, the abridged. And the bigger one is quite a huge book. So Yoga Vasishtha is full of this idea of non-causation. Okay. Now, Nagarjuna was trying to expound Shunyata or Shunya. So, the word Shunya, is usually translated into the English word nothingness. Now, what he's talking about is Shunyata is indescribable. Shunyata is indescribable. Many of the terms that Nagarjuna uses in Madhyamika Karya, that's the Bible of Shunyavada, and also Chandrakirti's commentary on it. Many of these words are used by Shankaracharya while describing Brahman, Advaita, non-dual, indescribable, non-dual. Beyond the reach of words, beyond verbalization. All these ideas you find Advaita also. So Nagarjuna was not the first great teacher who talked about non-causation. Maybe of course there are many such ideas in the Upanishadic literature throughout you find, but Yoga Vasishtha is very, very important. It's one very, very important Yoga Vedantic book. Only it focuses only on the conclusions. So, you're talking about Gaudapada. It is true that you can see the influence of Nagarjuna on Gaudapada. There are many terms that are very common to Gaudapada and also Nagarjuna. But it's be wrong to assume that Gaudapada took it from Nagarjuna. Because Nagarjuna's analysis is correct, but then he takes a turn to just the negative, to the all negating. And there are some viewers, some interpreters who tell you that Nagarjuna's Shunyavada was frequently misunderstood. I can give you an example from Chandrakirti. Chandrakirti is a great commentator on Nagarjuna. So, to call Shunyada as Shunyada itself is actually wrong, he says. Because Shunyada is beyond definition. But if you name it, you are defining it. More like Meister Eckhart saying, you cannot call the absolute reality as the Holy Trinity. Because when you are defining it, you are verbalizing it. And the absolute reality is beyond verbalization. Same classical idea in Advaita Vedanta. So, Chandrakirti takes the example. It's from Ayurveda. Many of the Buddhists were Ayurvedic doctors. Buddhists made some very great contribution to both Ayurveda and also to Nyaya and grammar. Rupavatara was actually one of the major books of later Buddhists. So, Chandrakirti says, suppose you have a stomach problem and you eat a root in those days to cleanse your stomach. But the root should not remain within them. The root also should be removed. Otherwise you will be unhealthy. So you have to go beyond the word Shunyada to really understand what Shunya really means. Because Shunya is beyond description, beyond definition. Shunya is the Paramartha Satyam. And everything else in this world is only Sanjida. It's a Vyavakarika. So you can see this Samvriddhi Satyam. Nagarjuna says Samvriddhi Satyam. Samvriddhi Satyam means the Vyavaharika, the everyday common sense experience. Is Samvriti Satyam. Paramartha Satyam is Shunyata, which is beyond definition, beyond verbalization, which is non-dual. It's also the word non-dual Advaita word is used by Nagarjuna in Madhyamika Karya. So
it was used by Nagarjuna, the word
yeah,
non-dual?
yeah. Advaita actually means non-dual. Advaita, see, that was before Shankaracharya. So remember, today we understand Advaita as a term that implies Advaita philosophy of Shankaracharya. But Advaita means non-dual. So in that sense. So Nagarjuna uses it, really speaking. But the Shunya is non-dual reality. It is the absolute reality. So, and when you reach Buddha nature, it's the Hinayana tradition, you are realizing this. Of course, there are conflicts between Hinayana realists, Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas, and Mahayana idealists like Nagarjuna. It's a different subject, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Before I ask a question from YouTube,
Yeah.
I saw Shay's hand up and Yogi's as well.
Yeah.
Shay, would you ask your question, please?
Hi. My question is, so I found the book online as we were talking about the lecture, and I'm seeing some of the earlier verses. They talk about the blessings that you can have, right? And it'll say the blessing of a human birth, but also the blessing of male birth.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how modern Vedanta talks about those concepts.
Yeah. You know, of course, there are two ways of approaching this subject. First of all, that was an age where Vedanta was studied mostly by the male folk. So that could be one explanation. But when we remember that some of the greatest Vedantic teachers of the Upanishadic times were women, like Gargi, Maitreyi and so on, you find a number of lady philosophers of the Upanishadic times. So that should be kept in mind. So that's one explanation. Males, remember today when we look at 8th century socio-cultural landscape through the prism of our times, where feminism, all these ideas, if we take, it will be an injustice. So we had to look at the philosophical system of those times and those times. So this is an important thing. But of course, if you ask a traditional scholar, he will tell you the word Purusha is, there are in Shankaracharya's own books, Purusha used, Purnatvat Purushaha, Purisheti iti Purushaha. So the word Purusha is defined in Shankaracharya's commentaries, of course, in Vedantic sense. A person in whom the Atman is the inner resident. This body-mind complex is a city or a home with 9 doors opening to the outside world, and in this body-mind complex there is somebody or something, the inner divine spark that is present, the inner resident. Puri Shedasidi means lying or sleeping, that's a meaning. Puri means in the city or in this body-mind complex mechanism, the divine spark is existing. Therefore, it is called Purusha. Second definition is Purnatvat Purusha. Because in all of us, there is that Atman, Brahman, Atman, the soul, it is the inner resident. Therefore, it's called Purusha. These are two definitions of the word Purusha found in Shankaracharya's commentaries. So, of course, from a socio-cultural angle, if you look at it, we have to remember we should be very realistic about it. So, if you, for example, if you read some of the teachings of even Emerson or Thoreau, and if you just apply the principles of social or economic equality that we are preaching today in 21st century, it may not always be fair to do that. It will be, but of course we can always say that, that's true. There is some kind of male chauvinism was there at all times, in all cultures, in all traditions. That is something that we cannot really deny. But we should also remember, a philosopher like Shankaracharya cannot be criticized for that, because he was not a social reformer. He was the product of his time. As a human being, as a teacher, he was the teacher of the highest philosophy. But as a person living in those times, he cannot detach himself completely out of the social landscape in which he was living. Think of Jesus Christ. He had to use the parables, the language of the socio-cultural conditions of his times. So we have to remember that factor always. Thank you for the question.
I think it's just one last comment. I think that all is a great explanation and it all makes sense. And it's not that you criticize them or you say the whole thing is wrong. I think when you see parts that are older and you say, okay, it's from a time that was different and it was just a product of that time, you say, are there other parts that were also just a product of that time?
Yeah.
You have to be very, I guess it is the discriminate. You have to be very discrimination. You have to say, okay, the bulk of it is true, and then there's pieces that are very unique to India in the 8th century, and you have to just, or you have a good teacher that explains it, right?
Society can never be perfect. Society is part of the world. And the world itself is impermanent and imperfect, according to Shankaracharya. It's very interesting. Actually, the very idea of a perfect world, where everything is absolutely wonderful, is only an imagination. At no time of history was the world ever perfect the way. So the very idea of perfection is a non-worldly, an otherworldly concept. That's why people have to invent a God and a heaven. Where all the problems that we are facing today are absent. Of course, without that higher aspiration, there would be no music, no higher literature, no higher art, and no higher philosophy, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. There's a question. Thanks for the inquiry so far.
Yeah.
Very, very helpful to me as well. And there's a question from YouTube. I know Yogi's got his hand up.
Yeah, most welcome. Yeah.
The question from YouTube is discrimination similar to wisdom, or does our mind discriminate between the real and unreal? I think what's intended is when that knowledge becomes wisdom. So in other words, when we get to wisdom, is the real wisdom the discrimination between the real and the unreal?
You're right. Now, without some degree of wisdom, we cannot even imagine that a proper discerning wisdom is necessary. Even the idea that we need to practice this higher discerning wisdom, I avoid using the word discrimination. That's a word used in the standard translations, but because of its doubtful and unpleasant connotations in certain historical circles, I would like to use the word discerning wisdom instead of discrimination. So the idea that we need a kind of discerning wisdom itself is inconceivable unless you have some wisdom. It's an important thing. And as we proceed further in the spiritual path, this wisdom becomes more and more real. That's the idea. What we call wisdom becomes more and more real and more complete. But without some wisdom, no one can even decide to waste, in the opinion of many people, 1.5 hours listening to this conversation, which is absolutely so unentertaining, no comedy, nothing. Still people have the patience to listen to this talk just because they have this wisdom. Impossible. Without wisdom...
Delightfully clear, Maharaj.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yogiji, please
Yogi.
unmute
Yeah,
yourself.
most welcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
The definition for the Nitya Vastu Viveka, discernment, I think is Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya.
Yeah.
And this Mithya is generally understood as the world we see during the waking period. And how is it compared with the dream experience, and is it also mithya, or is there any difference between these two experiences?
Yeah. In the later verses after this 19th verse, in subsequent verses you find the definitions of what is Nitya Nitya Viveka, Shama, Dhamma, Uparadhi, Diksha, Sabdha, Samadhanam, all these will be defined. But now coming to subject. So, according to Vedanta, there are different prakriyas or methods of analysis. This avasthatraya prakriya means the method of analyzing the reality based on analyzing our consciousness in waking state, dream state and deep sleep states. Jagra, Swapna, Sushupti. In waking, dream and deep sleep states. This is an important thing. Now, whatever you experience in waking state and in dream state belong to mithya. Why? What is mithya? Mithya is something that will be cancelled later by some pramanas or by some experience. That's why, jnana nivartyatvam mithyatvam, sat viviktatvam mithyatvam. One of the great writers of Vedantic tradition, that is Prakashatmayadi, in his Panchapadika Vivarana, he defines mithya is that which will be cancelled when you get true knowledge. Mithya is that which is opposed to the reality. Now, when you wake up, you realize what you saw in dreams is really not existing. And again, when you are dreaming, what you experience in waking state are not existing in the same manner. So there is always a change. Mutually, they are cancelled. Therefore, they are mithya. Again, mithya is not absolutely unreal. Mithya means what is absolutely not real. And the absolute reality means it should remain the same without any change in the past, present and future. That's the meaning of absolute reality, paramarthika satta. That's an important point to remember. Okay.
Are there any circumstances where these two experiences are differentiated and different words are used for Swapna and Jagrata?
Swapna and Jagrata, yeah. No, Shankaracharya says, Swapna experience and Jagrata experience are really different, but from the highest standpoint, they are unreal. That difference doesn't matter. And this is an important thing, From the highest Turiya point of view, Jagrata, Swapna are the same because both are unreal. But between them, there is a difference. It's called, Gaudapada calls it Idaredara Bheda, means between them, there is a difference. So I have given this Mandukya Karya classes. You can send audio version, you find more than 120 classes you find. See, there is a great difference between Jagra state and waking state. In waking state, you need 6 hours to go to New York from here. But in dream state, it takes only split second. And again, in Jagra state, you are going to sleep in San Francisco, you wake up in San Francisco. But in dream, you go to sleep in San Francisco, you feel dreaming you reach New York. So there is Kala Bheda, Desha Bheda, all these differences are there. but there are differences, internal differences. But both are equally unreal because both are different from Turiya in that sense.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, thank you. Actually, Yogiji, please remember, when we really understand the psychological, spiritual psychology, such psychological implication of Mithyatvam, it can become a wonderful tool for psychological counseling. All problems of phobias, obsessions, and melancholias, all can be treated with this idea. Everything is changing. So why you worry about it? All anxiety neuroses are due to obsession, wrong perception, imposing permanence on what is impermanent. That is the problem. Okay? Thank you,
Yes,
thank you.
Maharaj. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maharaj,
Yeah.
early in the address tonight, or this morning, depending on where you're at, you mentioned metta.
Nitya?
Purified intellect.
Oh, Medha.
Metta.
Yeah, Medha, yeah, correct.
And I was wondering when you put it that way, who wouldn't want to purify their intellect?
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a desirable
True. But to purify our intellect, we need to purify our emotions and feelings, our the way we become sensitive to different things. So remember, we interpret everything at the cultural level, emotional level, not the philosophical level. Philosophy really never helps you in real life unless that philosophy comes down to the level of your emotions and feelings, which is called culture. This is an important thing. So the reason why people read philosophy but they are not happy with anything is because the philosophy is only skin deep. And remember, pure intellectual conviction is skin deep. Emotions go much deeper. Unless higher ideas become part of our emotional structure, higher ideas will not be of much practical use. So, to have this purified intellect, we have to purify our emotions and feelings, our thoughts, the way we react to situations. For that, we have to practice some spiritual moral disciplines. That's a way to refine. That's a refinery for intellect. We use the word intellect because that's the only term we can use in English language. But buddhi or medha, to define it as purified intellect is only partially correct. That's the problem. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a question. I'm reading the question. Thank you so much.
There's a comment, but no further questions that I see.
Yeah.
Thank you for the chat comment, by the way. I don't see any further questions on YouTube
Thank
or in
you.
the chat.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for everything.
Thank you, Swami.
Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Thank you everyone. Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Yeah.